Economist Azar Jamine on some of the interventions that the president has put in place, chief amongst which, Azar Jamine, is the declaration of the state of disaster, with the president saying the state of disaster will enable us to provide practical measures that we need to take to support businesses in the food production, storage and retail supply chain, including for the rollout of generators, solar panels and uninterrupted power supply. Your thought?
My thoughts is, theoretically, it sounds like a great idea, but in practical terms, I worry about that because essentially government has to find the funds to do so, and that means having to borrow at a time when tax revenues are coming under pressure due to the fact that economic growth itself is quite low. The second aspect is that policy of this nature tends to exacerbate many of the inequalities in the country, because what it's doing is helping those who are reasonably, who receive a reasonable income at the expense, and basically there's no real assistance happening directly to those who have no means of actually accessing a lot of ways to bypass load shedding.
But wait, there's more. There's a minister now, or what does the president characterize it? A minister of electricity. And here's a little bit more detail following his announcement yesterday as he was teeing off in Cape Town. Let's take a look, listen at this.
Including appointing a minister of electricity who is going to be focused just merely on ensuring that we deal with the state of with load shedding and restore the capability of Eskom, working with the board and working with the management on an on-hand basis. And that is why that minister will be in my office, because in the end it is a responsibility that the people of South Africa have imposed on me. And so I must have the wherewithal, the capability to deal with it. And whatever criticism there may be, it is criticism that is at the moment misguided, because what we should all be focusing on is load shedding and dealing with it. And that should be it. And we need the space, the instruments, the capability to deal with it.
Azar Jamine, your criticism is misguided. Never mind that we're going to be borrowing more. Never mind that this is an anti-poor move, as you characterize it. Your criticism is misguided.
Well, quite possibly, but the general feeling is, why do we have to have a Minister of Public Enterprises overseeing Eskom, Minister of Mineral and Energy Resources, and now a Minister of Electricity? Why could we not have actually sorted out the problem correctly over so many years with the ministries that we had, including the fact that President Ramaphosa himself, when he was Deputy President, was assigned the project of heading up a war room to look over Eskom and to get things right. What is going to change here? It sounds like almost a sense of panic that the existing structures have been unable to sort out this problem, and it sounds almost like an attempt to try and prove that something new and concrete is being developed to try and find solutions. Why should the outcome be any more successful now than it was before? That is the question that I'm asking, and it comes at an additional cost, given that people have already been complaining about the surfeit of ministers in our cabinet compared with most other countries in the world. Now we're adding yet another ministry.
There's a trust deficit, with people pointing out to how things went down during COVID-19 at the height of it all, right? So as people were losing their lives, there were people who were looting. And so now here we have a state of disaster again, and the question comes up, just how much can we trust the current administration to oversee these funds? And the president says no, but the Auditor General, who already has a lot of work on her hands, will then step in to provide oversight. Is this something that goes some way for you, at least, to quell those fears?
Well, theoretically it should, but it's an indictment of having to look over your shoulder every time you take any measures to make sure that they are not going to be subject to corruption. This whole system that has been introduced by the government is clearly corrupt, and it is struggling itself to try and put an end to it, to something that it has been of its own creation in a way.
Azar Jamine, is the president being ill-advised? I ask perhaps because the party naturally has welcomed all the interventions that he has outlined where the electricity crisis is concerned. But who has the ear of the king? And from what we are seeing, what is it that they are whispering in his ear? Is he being ill-advised?
I think one has to realize that he's part of a huge organization that has actually been, whose governance has actually been declining and deteriorating over many years. And efforts are being made to try and portray a renewal in the organization. And I think there's a struggle. I personally think that the president understands very well what the problems are. And in fact, the sonar spells out many of the problems. The dilemma that we face now is the lack of trust, lack of confidence that even as much as he has spelt out what the problems are and what the solutions to be found will be, based on previous sonars where he has similarly laid out problems and promised what would happen, and we have not seen any appropriate action. And so there is this huge trust deficit. Can we is this going to make any difference? The attempt was to try and portray something different, but will it actually manifest in any different outcome from the lack of implementation that we have seen in the past?
It's only February and you can't keep up with how many hurdles the president has had to jump. So maybe for the purpose of this conversation, let's say hurdle 1 has been jumped. He delivered the State of the Nation address, and now we are waiting an imminent cabinet reshuffle. From what he said about the Minister of Public Enterprises, is it a foregone conclusion, at least to you, that Pravin Gordhan will remain what the president calls the shareholder overlooking Eskom to steer the restructuring of the power utility and ensure the establishment of the transition of the company?
You see, what I believe that statement reflects is precisely the ideological divide that exists within the ruling party, because the solutions that are being suggested for solving the electricity crisis involve embracing the private sector more and more actively to resolve some of these blockages. And yet, within the ruling party, there is a very strong spirit of antagonism towards anything to do with the private sector. And by giving that mandate to Pravin Gordhan, the attempt is to try and make sure that the government still has the overriding oversight of what is happening and is not, so to speak, privatizing Eskom. That is what I see behind it, because the concept of privatization is being opposed by many within the tripartite alliance, not only the ANC, but of course the trade unions themselves. And Ramaphosa is trying to fight against that ideology and trying to implement what is feasible and potentially successful. But he has to keep fighting this reluctance to embrace anything to do with the private sector.
How long can he keep that up? There was a suggestion post-conference that energy should go to Gwede Mantashe. We know his utterances about the just transition, about green energy, etc., etc. And so how long can he keep that play up? Because then that would also suggest, following the statement, that that move is not going to happen, that energy is going, Eskom is going to go to the energy department, I beg your pardon.
Well, this is the dilemma that I think Ramaphosa faces, and the dilemma is worsened by the fact that two of his primary factional supporters are Pravin Gordhan and Gwede Mantashe. So he really doesn't want to antagonize either of them, and yet they are standing in the way of actually opening up the sphere to allow free electricity generation and purchases of electricity from one party to the other to enable the supply of electricity to increase. And so, this is why there is so much skepticism about the idea of now appointing a Minister of Electricity. Is this going to try and bypass Pravin Gordhan or Gwede Mantashe? But at the same time, the President is reluctant to upset them because they are staunch supporters of his factions. And they are, less accused of corrupt activities like the RET faction, for example.
Thank you very much. Azar Jamine is an economist for your time this afternoon.